want you to spend the night with me.
I want to be alone.
How dare you talk to me in such manner?
You motherfucker!
Before people gave him a name, before whispers bent around street corners and doors were locked at sunset, he was just a man walking through the city like anyone else. That was the most dangerous part. No one remembers the exact first day he crossed the line. Cities rarely notice the moment rot begins. It starts small, an insult unanswered, a shove ignored, a theft dismissed as bad luck. Evil does not arrive screaming. It arrives testing boundaries. The city was called Greyhaven, a sprawl of concrete veins and narrow streets where survival had long replaced hope. Police were stretched thin. Politics clogged justice. People learned to mind their business because minding someone else's got you buried. He learned that early. His name was Cade Moreland, though later people stopped using it. Names give humanity. Legends do not need them. Cade grew up in the southern blocks, where buildings leaned like tired men and windows stayed barred even in the heat. His father was a ghost, present in scars, absent in body. His mother worked herself into silence. Power to Cade was the only language that ever made sense. At 16, he broke a boy's arm in an alley over a gambling debt that wasn't even his. He didn't raise his voice, didn't rush, just applied pressure until bones surrendered. When the boy screamed, Cade leaned close and said calmly, "Remember this feeling. This is what happens when you waste my time." People saw. No one spoke. That was the lesson. By 20, he wasn't stealing anymore, he was collecting. He walked through markets and bars like a tax collector for fear itself. Vendors handed over money without being asked. Men looked away. Women pulled their coats tighter, not because he touched them, but because of how he looked, like their refusal would be a personal insult. He understood something most bullies don't. Violence is most effective when it's selective. He didn't attack everyone. Just enough. A shopkeeper who hesitated lost his front window. A man who protested got publicly beaten and left bleeding where others could see him. A gang that tried to challenge him vanished one by one, until even their graffiti was painted over by silence. Soon stories spread faster than truth. They said he couldn't be hurt. They said he'd killed men with his bare hands. They said if he wanted something, it already belonged to him. Fear did the work for him. Women crossed the street when they saw him coming. Not because he chased them, but because he smiled when they noticed him. A slow, knowing smile. As if the city itself had already agreed to his terms. He harassed. He cornered. He threatened futures instead of bodies. "You've got a nice life," he'd say quietly. "Be a shame if it got complicated." And people complied. The police knew him. Everyone did. But he walked free because fear had roots in offices too. Evidence disappeared. Witnesses forgot. Files went missing. Greyhaven wasn't his city by law, but by consent extracted through terror. And Cade loved that most of all. He didn't want obedience. He wanted acknowledgement. By the time he turned 30, his presence changed the air in a room. Conversations died when he entered. Music lowered itself. Even bartenders stiffened, already calculating how much damage he might cause if bored. That's when he started believing the lie himself. That he was inevitable. That no one could stop him. That strength was loud, cruel, and absolute. The city had taught him that lesson. What the city hadn't taught him, what he never learned, was the difference between violence and discipline. And that mistake was waiting for him at the far end of a bar one quiet night, sitting alone with a glass in her hand, eyes calm, posture relaxed, carrying a kind of stillness no predator ever recognizes until it's too late. Greyhaven learned to move differently because of him. People didn't say his name out loud anymore. They referred to him sideways in half sentences and glances. "You know who? That man. Him." Children were taught rules their parents had never learned. Don't stare. Don't run. Don't answer back. If you see him coming, step aside. Fear became routine. Routine became culture. On Mercer Street, old Mrs. Halden closed her bakery an hour earlier every evening. Not because he had ever touched her, but because once Cade had stood outside her shop, reading the menu like he had all the time in the world. He never came in. Never said a word. Just smiled once and walked away. The next day, she boarded her windows earlier. At dockside, a longshoreman named Elias refused to hand over his earnings. He had just had a daughter. Thought that gave him courage. Cade listened. Let him talk. Then took Elias's work permit and tore it in half in front of everyone. No punches. No blood. Just the end of a livelihood. That's worse than pain, Cade said evenly. Pain fades. No one stepped forward. No one ever did. Greyhaven's police precincts told themselves the same lie every day. We're building a case. But cases take witnesses, and witnesses require courage. Courage was the rarest currency left. And Cade knew it. He fed on the city's submission. It sharpened him. Made him careless. He started walking alone more often, no entourage, no backup. When you believe you are untouchable, why hide? That was when the city's fear fully transformed into something else. Resentment buried so deep it barely remembered how to breathe. There were whispers of men who had tried. A boxer. A gang leader. An ex-cop with a shotgun. Every story ended the same way. Broken bodies, vanished names. So when people noticed her, they didn't know what they were seeing. She appeared in Greyhaven without announcement, without rumors. No dramatic entrance. Just a woman renting a small apartment near the old rail yards, paying on time, keeping to herself. She was called Mara Vale. No one knew she was a soldier. Not the bartender who served her quietly. Not the landlord who noticed how little furniture she owned. Not the neighbor who heard her leave at dawn some mornings and return with a stillness that felt earned. Mara didn't move like the people in Greyhaven. She didn't rush. She didn't flinch. Her eyes didn't drop when men looked too long. She watched. At the bar called the Low Tide, she sat at the far end, back to the wall, drink untouched until she'd mapped the room. It wasn't paranoia. It was habit. A trained awareness so ingrained it looked like calm. She saw Cade the first night he entered. Not when he walked in, but when the room reacted to him. The music dipped. The bartender stiffened. Two men at a table stood and left without finishing their drinks. Fear arrived before he did. Mara didn't turn her head right away. She didn't need to. She felt the shift, the way soldiers feel incoming weather. When she finally looked, she didn't see a king. She saw a man who had never been properly challenged. Cade noticed her almost immediately. Not because she was loud. Not because she was trying to be seen. But because she wasn't afraid. That was new. Women usually avoided his gaze. Men folded into themselves. But Mara sat still, glass in hand, posture relaxed, eyes steady, not defiant, not inviting. Neutral. Predators hate neutrality. They need reaction. Cade smiled. Not the cruel smile he wore for enemies. This one was smoother, practiced. He adjusted his jacket and walked toward her like the bar belonged to him. Mara watched him approach, already measuring distance, angles, exits. Her heartbeat didn't change. Mind if I join you? He asked, voice low, confident, already expecting compliance. She didn't look impressed. Didn't look scared. No, she said simply. The word landed heavier than a shout. Around them, the bar seemed to hold its breath. Cade blinked once. That almost never happened. He chuckled softly as if amused. That wasn't a question, he replied, pulling out the chair anyway. Mara's hand closed around her glass. Not to throw it, not to grip it as a weapon. Just to set it down. I heard you, she said. My answer didn't change. Something in her tone, flat, unyielding, scraped against Cade's confidence. He felt it, though he didn't yet understand why. People were watching now. Pretending not to. Waiting. Cade leaned closer. You don't know who I am. Mara met his eyes fully for the first time. I don't care. That was the moment. The moment when the city's longest night began to crack. Cade had been laughed at before. Mocked once or twice in the early days, by men who didn't yet know what he was capable of. That kind of laughter never lasted long. It usually ended with blood and apologies. But this wasn't laughter. It was worse. It was dismissal. Mara's eyes had already moved past him, scanning the bar again, as if he were nothing more than a temporary obstruction. Cade felt something unfamiliar crawl up his spine. Not fear. Not yet. Irritation. You're in the wrong part of town to talk like that, he said quietly. The words were calm, but underneath them lay a promise. One that had been honored too many times before. Mara didn't rise to it. I'm exactly where I chose to be, she replied. The bartender's hands shook as he wiped the counter. He'd seen this pattern before. The smile, the soft voice, the moment before everything went wrong. He wanted to shout. Wanted to warn her. But warning had never saved anyone. Cade placed his hand on the back of the chair she was sitting on. It was a small thing. Casual. A test. Mara noticed instantly. Her body didn't tense. Her shoulders didn't rise. But her eyes sharpened the way a blade does when it catches light. Remove your hand, she said. The bar went silent enough to hear the ice crack in glasses. Cade smiled wider. Or what? Mara stood. Not abruptly. Not in anger. Just stood, smooth, balanced, close enough now that Cade had to tilt his head slightly to keep eye contact. Up close he saw it. The scars, not obvious, not dramatic, but precise. He saw the way she stood with her weight centered, her feet angled just enough to move in any direction. This wasn't bravado. This was training. Cade's smile faltered for half a second. He covered it quickly. You think you're special? He asked. Everyone thinks that, right before they learn. Mara leaned in just enough for him to hear her clearly, and only him. I already learned, she said. You're just loud. That did it. His hand shot out, not to strike her but to grab her arm, to assert control, to re-establish the hierarchy the city had handed him. He never got the chance. Mara moved like a door slamming in a storm, sudden, efficient, inevitable. She twisted his wrist inward, stepped into his space, and drove her shoulder into his chest with controlled force. Not a brawl. A maneuver. Cade stumbled back, crashing into a table. Glass shattered. Chairs scraped. People shouted. For the first time in years, Cade Moreland was off balance. What the hell? He started, rage finally cracking his voice. Enough, Mara said. She hadn't raised her voice. She didn't need to. Cade lunged. That was his mistake. He fought like a man used to winning. Wide swings, brute force, anger. Mara fought like someone trained to end fights. She sidestepped his punch, hooked his elbow, and drove him face first into the bar. Wood cracked. Bottles fell. Gasps rippled through the room. Cade roared and swung again, catching her shoulder. It hurt, but not the way he expected. She absorbed it, rolled with it, and responded with a knee to his ribs that emptied his lungs in one sharp breath. The city's terror wheezed. People backed away, stunned. Phones came out. Whispers spread like fire. This can't be happening. Cade staggered, blood on his lip now, disbelief burning hotter than pain. You're dead, he snarled. You have no idea. Mara grabbed him by the collar and slammed him into the floor. Art. She knelt beside him, pinning him with terrifying calm, her knee on his chest, her hand locked on his wrist in a hold so precise he couldn't move without breaking himself. I know exactly who you are, she said quietly. Men like you always confuse fear with respect. Cade struggled. Failed. Panic flickered behind his eyes. For the first time the room didn't look away. Every witness mattered now. Mara released him and stood, stepping back as if the fight were already over. This ends tonight, she said to him, and to the city listening through their silence. Cade dragged himself up, humiliated, furious, and suddenly aware of something he had never felt before. The myth was bleeding. The door to the low tide burst open as bodies spilled into the street. Cold air rushed in, sharp and unforgiving, carrying the smell of oil, rain, and old concrete. The neon sign above the bar flickered like it was unsure which reality it belonged to, the one where Cade Moreland ruled or the one cracking open beneath his feet. People poured out after them. Some out of panic. Some out of curiosity. A few because they needed to see. Cade stumbled onto the sidewalk, chest heaving, face twisted with fury and disbelief. Blood ran freely now, dripping onto the pavement he'd walked like a king for years. You think this ends here? He shouted, voice raw. You think this changes anything? Mara followed him outside, measured and calm, stopping a few steps away. She took in the street the way she had taken in the bar. Angles, distance, bystanders. She was already accounting for everyone's safety. It already has, she said. A crowd formed despite themselves. Windows opened above. Phones glowed like fireflies. Greyhaven watched. Cade charged again. No warning this time. No pretense. He tackled her toward a parked car, metal screeching as her back hit the hood. For a split second, raw strength worked in his favor. He pressed down, snarling, spittle flying. There you are, he hissed. Just like everyone else. Mara's knee came up fast and brutal, slamming into his side. He howled. She rolled them, using his momentum against him, and twisted free. They separated, circling now. This wasn't a bar fight anymore. This was something public. Something symbolic. Cade swung wildly, fists heavy, untrained, driven by humiliation more than intent. Mara blocked, redirected, punished. A sharp strike to the throat. A sweep that sent him crashing onto the asphalt. A stomp beside his head, not on it. A warning. Stay down, she said. He didn't. Pride dragged him up again. Pride and the weight of a city he terrorized. If he fell now, he didn't just lose a fight. He lost everything. So he reached for the last thing he had left. A knife flashed in his hand. The crowd gasped. Mara froze, not in fear but in calculation. Her eyes locked onto the blade, her body coiling like a spring pulled tight. "You don't want to do this," she said evenly. Cade laughed, high and broken. "I want to do a lot of things." He lunged. What followed happened too fast for most people to understand, but later it would be replayed again and again, frame by frame, in grainy videos and whispered retellings. Mara stepped inside his reach. Her hand clamped onto his wrist. She rotated, disarmed him with a sharp crack, and drove her elbow into his jaw. The knife clattered to the ground. She didn't stop. A strike to the ribs. A hook to the side of his head. A controlled, devastating takedown that slammed him onto the pavement so hard the sound echoed off the buildings. Cade lay there, coughing, shaking, utterly broken. Mara stood over him, chest rising slowly, barely winded. Sirens wailed in the distance. Finally, she crouched beside him, close enough for him to hear her over the noise. "You spent years teaching this city to be afraid," she said quietly. "Tonight you learned something else." He looked up at her with eyes full of confusion and something dangerously close to grief. "What?" he rasped. "That fear isn't power," she said. "It's borrowed. And it always gets reclaimed." She stood and stepped away as police cars screeched to a halt. This time they didn't look the other way. The crowd didn't disperse immediately. They stared. Some cried. Some laughed. Some just stood there, stunned, as if waking from a long shared nightmare. Greyhaven had seen its terror fall. And it didn't look like a monster anymore. It looked like a man on the ground, stripped of the only thing he'd ever had. Cade Moreland was handcuffed on the pavement where he had once walked without consequence. The metal clicked shut around his wrists, sharp and final. He didn't resist, not because he'd grown wise, but because his body had nothing left to give. His face was swollen, his breath shallow, his eyes unfocused. The crowd watched as officers hauled him upright, and for the first time in years, no one stepped aside for him. Some people cheered. Others simply stared, afraid that if they blinked, the moment would undo itself. "Is it really him?" someone whispered. "It has to be," another replied. "Look at him." Cade heard them. Every word landed like a blow deeper than any punch Mara had delivered. He'd built himself into something larger than flesh, a presence, a rule, a certainty. And now the city was seeing the truth. He was just a man. The police tried to regain control, shouting orders, pushing the crowd back, but Greyhaven didn't move right away. It had spent years looking down. Tonight it looked back. Mara stood off to the side, hands visible, posture relaxed. An officer approached her cautiously, eyes flicking between her and the man in cuffs. "You hurt?" he asked. "No," she replied. "You the one who—" "Yes." There was a pause. Respect crept into his voice before he could stop it. "We'll need a statement." "Of course." She didn't linger. Didn't watch Cade get shoved into the back of the patrol car. She didn't need to. Her work was done. Or so she thought. At the precinct, Cade's legend collapsed under fluorescent lights. The interrogation room didn't care who he used to be. It smelled like disinfectant and stale coffee. The walls were bare. The chair bolted to the floor. He sat there for hours. No favors came. No phone calls smoothed things over. No files disappeared. Someone, many someones, had decided they were done being afraid. Witnesses came forward. One by one. A shopkeeper. A dock worker. A bartender. A woman who had been threatened into silence for years. Every story chipped away at him. Every signature sealed something he could never bully back into place. By morning, the charges stacked higher than his pride ever had. For the first time in his life, Cade Moreland was powerless. And power, he would learn, is not something you survive losing easily. What? Mara Vale gave her statement calmly, precisely, leaving nothing out and nothing embellished. She didn't boast. She didn't dramatize. She simply described what happened. When the officer finally asked, "So, military?" she nodded once. "Former or active?" "Active." That raised eyebrows. They asked where she trained. She answered. They asked why she was in Greyhaven. She paused just briefly. "Passing through," she said. That wasn't entirely true. Mara had been reassigned, burned out from deployments that blurred together, cities that looked different but felt the same. She'd asked for leave somewhere quiet. She hadn't expected to find a city held hostage by fear. And she hadn't expected to become its turning point. Greyhaven woke up different the next morning. It wasn't safer yet. Not magically. But something had shifted. People walked a little straighter. Shopkeepers opened their doors earlier. Conversations lingered instead of cutting off. Fear didn't vanish, but it loosened its grip. At the low tide, someone paid for a stranger's drink. At the docks, a man laughed out loud for the first time in months. At a bakery on Mercer Street, Mrs. Halden left her windows unboarded until dusk. And everywhere the same question echoed. Who was she? They spoke her name carefully, like a prayer that might break if said too loudly. Mara Vale. She didn't stay long enough to enjoy it. A week later, her apartment was empty. Rent paid. Keys left on the counter. No forwarding address. But her absence didn't feel like abandonment. Felt like a lesso. In a holding cell, Cade lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling. The city he'd ruled no longer belonged to him. His name had turned poisonous. His strength meant nothing. His silence earned no fear. What haunted him most wasn't the pain. It was her calm. The way she had looked at him, not with hatred, not even with anger, but with certainty. As if she had always known how his story would end. Support our community as you like and subscribe to our channel. Thank you.